Namaste. Welcome to another episode of Nava Vimarsh podcast. So, Namaste, Sreejit.
Namaste, namaste.
Yes. So, today, as we had discussed in our previous conversation, so we are going to discuss two works. Uh, One work, actually, one with another. So, one work is The Positive Background of Hindu Sociology. This is the book. So I have gone through the book and I have invited Professor Sreejit Dutta to actually give more insights on the book itself and also on the specific topic of Shukraniti. So, Sreejit Da, so please enlighten us as we can see that we have named our title Ancient Indian Polity, Illuminations from Professor Benoy Kumar Sarkar. So first, I would like to request you to give a brief about the life and works of Professor Benoy Kumar Sarkar, and then we will proceed on the topics work that he had done on this book.
Right, sure. First of all, let me thank you for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to talk about Professor Benoy Kumar Sarkar and connect with your audiences. I'm very happy to be here. So, Professor Benoy Kumar Sarkar is really an extraordinary intellectual, somebody whose works and life, I believe, are not adequately discussed in today's time, and especially in the Indian nationalist circles, where it should be properly uh, analyzed, critiqued, and assimilated as much as possible. Because Professor Sarkar is a product of the movement that we know as the national education movement. This is something that came out of the great upheaval in Bengali cultural, intellectual, and political life during the Bongo Bhango or the Bengal partition of 1905, when stalwarts of Bengali culture, such as Rabindranath Tagore, Sri Aurobindo, Satish Chandra Mukherjee, Raja Subodh Chandra Mullik, these people came together and decided that there should be a parallel system of education offered by Indian nationalists in order to pose a kind of challenge to the Sarkari or government run schools and colleges by the colonial British government in India. So, as a result of that, what started really at the beginning was the Dawn Society, and the Dawn Society was running schools and also a kind of technical institution which they did not call college by that word exactly, but it really was a college because people who had higher learning had joined there voluntarily in order to offer teaching, mentorship to students, many of whom were, by the way, expelled by the University of Calcutta, which was the main institution of higher learning at that time in Bengal. And it used to be a place of learning where students from all over India were attracted. But many of these students were expelled because they were agitating against the colonial British government at that time, and especially because of the draconian laws and rules, circulars that were passed and enacted by the British government. So the national education became a kind of sanctuary for all these rebel students, nationalist students. And Professor Sarkar started his career with the national education movement as a student, really, because he was one of the pupils of Acharya Satish Chandra Mukhopadhyay. And Satish Chandra Mukhopadhyay is somebody whose life and work deserves to be discussed, in full separately. And I have earlier discussed his life in other platforms. And the kind of educational institute that Satish Chandra was running, the kind of mentorship that he was offering to young Bengali students at that time, produced great scholars in time, such as the likes of Professor Sarkar himself, and also Radha Kumud Mukherjee, another great historian who has dwelt on the positive aspects of Indian history. We will talk about what positive really means in this context. So this was the background of Professor Benoy Kumar Sarkar. Later on, when Professor Sarkar himself became an educator, he started his career as a volunteer professor at the National Education Council of Bengal. He was closely associated with the National Council of Education as well as the district level National Council, which was basically the wing of the same organization, functioning in his district of birth, that is Malda or Maldaho. So he was parallelly teaching, mentoring students from both these centers, both at the national level in Calcutta and also at the district level in his birthplace of Malda. And parallelly, Professor Sarkar was writing. He was prodigious in terms of uh, producing output, written output. He was writing both in Bengali and English, even though he was proficient in several languages, including Sanskrit, of course, Hindi, and many European languages, the major European languages such as Italian, German, and French. So he was also, as a result, quite well connected with European scholars of the time, and especially from scholars in Italy and Germany, where his works were very regularly published. In fact, his major publications, including some of the early papers that went on to become or included in the book that we are discussing today, The Positive Background of Hindu Sociology, were first published in some of the well-known journals of Germany, Italy, and USA. So these writings basically started to be published from 1910, and maybe a little bit earlier, 1907, I think, is the first time when Professor Sarkar started publishing majorly, writing his scholarly essays, papers, and also he started publishing books mainly on education, but also on the subject of sociology, which became the kind of main discipline in which his contribution is to be noted. And let me also add at this point that in time, in his career as a scholar and writer and as an author, he established his name in the field of sociology so well and so strongly that a new method or a new ideology, even one can say, one can call it an ideology also, came to be known by his name, which we know as Sarkarism, after Professor Benoy Kumar Sarkar. So we see that throughout 1910s, 1920s, and 30s, and also to a great extent in the early 40s, Professor Sarkar has prolifically written and published many, many papers and books. Unfortunately, he died quite young in 1940, I think 48 or 9. I'm forgetting the exact year, when he was on a lecture tour in the US. So that is the kind of life of Professor Sarkar in a nutshell, where I have focused mainly on his contribution as a scholar. But to summarize this, I would like to say that Professor Sarkar's contribution to Indian educational field, as well as in the clarification of ideas regarding India, both its material culture as well as its ideological culture, are immense to the point of being revolutionary. So, there were revolutionaries at the time of the Bangabhanga or Swadeshi Andolan. 1905 generated it, and one of the revolutionaries in the intellectual field, not so much in the political field, was Professor Benoy Kumar Sarkar. So he is really a product of the time that has been described by himself as the glorious revolution of Bengal, in 1905. So he is really a product of that time and a revolutionary intellectual, a tremendous force to reckon with in the field of social sciences and humanities.
Thank you. I think I could not have asked a better person than you to actually give the introduction, because you have given an introduction which actually encompasses the whole of 1995, 1905, when the revolution actually happened, in terms of Bongo Bongo, and also the legacy that Professor Sarkar has left us with us. He wrote so much that we can't even read. So that's how prodigious he was in terms of writing, and
That's
the
right.
writing quality itself. Like we had actually read two episodes of the same book. We will
Oh,
continue to read it. Yeah, actually we read two portion of the book, but unfortunately, today people don't like serious things. But we are trying to make things a little bit more encouraging for people, so that we can have a little bit more of this reading. We are
yes,
devising
it
ways
is
to actually
necessary.
make we are devising ways for the audience to actually get more connected, just not reading a bland book reading that actually people will not watch it. We are trying to find new
Right.
ways to do it. So my next question to you is, could you give us, because you are the domain expert on this field, so could you give us a kind of summary this book discusses, so that the audience, if they want to pick up the book, okay, what they would learn, what they would understand in terms of sociology, in terms of ancient Indian sociology itself, and also a little bit more about Shukraniti, what Shukraniti role plays in our society and also in sociology.
Right, sure. So I'm very glad that you have taken up these two books in particular, the Sukraniti, as translated into English by Professor Sarkar, and the positive background of Hindu sociology. So let me first tell our audience why these two books are important and what is the real interconnection between them. First of all, the Shukraniti is regarded as one of the Niti Shastras, which fall under the Danda Niti domain of literature, into which, Danda Niti is basically one of the fourfold divisions, as we can find in Kautya's Arthashastra. These fourfold divisions are the main categories into which all of Indian knowledge systems, all the literature that ancient India has produced, and in fact, why just ancient India? We can definitely and confidently say that the continuous Indian civilization, goes on producing all that knowledge, all the literature can be divided into four parts. So, now, one of the major parts of these fourfold divisions is Dandaniti, which relates to society, politics, and economics. But it also deals with what can be described as moral science or ethics in English. The confusion that might arise in some people's minds when I say that, a kind of field that deals with both sociology, political science, as well as economics, and at the same time it embodies moral sciences, it embodies, morality and ethics. Ethics is, as is well known, a prominent subfield within the discipline of philosophy. How are they really connected? So, in order to explain it, one thing has to be kept in mind that in ancient Indian worldview, the whole conduct of the polity, that is how a country will be governed, uh, was undercut by, was really based on a thorough building of the character of all those who will be involved with it, and especially the prince or the king. And this is not something peculiar to ancient India. This is also something that will become more and more clear as we discuss these two books, and especially the positive background of Hindu sociology, because a similar sort of approach is visible in medieval Europe's treatises on politics, administration, and society and economics. The great example that comes to our mind, and of course, Professor Sarkar has referred to this reference several times in his positive background, is Machiavelli's Il Principe. So, Il Principe, or in English translation, the title would sound as The Prince by Machiavelli, the uh, Italian thinker, philosopher, and statesman, is a similar kind of book as the Shukraniti. Now, Shukraniti is something that is traced back to the late classical age in ancient India, and it is really considered as a treatise which comes after the Arthashastra of Kautilya. We know that Arthashastra of Kautilya is the most well-known work in Dandaniti or Niti Shastra. I'm going to use the two words Dandaniti and Niti Shastra interchangeably. That is to say that they are more or less similar in meaning. They are synonymous. Now, Arthashastra is basically looked upon as a compendium, which is compiling all the things that are related to statecraft, related to taxing, to the larger field of economics, and it also touches upon the preparation of the king, the administrator, the ruler, the governor. So again, the moral sciences or ethics, these subjects become a part of the Arthashastra of Kautilya. Now, how is the Shukraniti or Shukraniti Sara? Sometimes the Shukraniti is also known by the name Niti Sara of Shukracharya. That is also something that has been, clarified by Professor Sarkar in his translation of the Shukraniti. The main difference would be of volume, because Kautilya's Arthashastra is really an encyclopedic work, and Shukraniti can be looked upon as a more abstract work, where the principles of statecraft, the principles of economics, and all the other allied subjects, along with the moral teaching part, have been put in the sutra form. So that sort of work becomes comparatively handier, when somebody like a governor, like a ruler, has to always keep ready at hand. So if there is some kind of moral dilemma, if there is some kind of practical challenge that has arisen in his conduct of the state, then he can quickly refer to this book as a kind of manual. So it is like a ready manual. It is much more crisp in size and volume compared to the Arthashastra of Kautilya. So that's the main difference. Other than that, there is no difference in terms of the subject matter, and also not much difference in terms of how the subject matter is treated. In one book, in Kautilya's book, it is treated in greater detail, and in Shukraniti Sara, it is much more crisp. But the main or the crucial difference lies in the experience that the author of the Shukraniti has gained through time. Because Kautilya had compiled his work, Arthashastra, at the time of King Chandragupta Maurya, as we all know. So it is the experience of a new resurgent India, which is quite young in its aspirations of expansion, in its aspirations of imperial politics. So there, the ambitions, the experiences are quite new. But by the time we come to Shukracharya's Niti Sara or Shukraniti, the Indian civilization and Indian thinkers on these subjects, especially on political science, economics, and ethics, have gained a lot more experience, not just because a lot of time has passed and therefore they had time to reflect, critically think about the implications of applying the prescriptions of Kautilya, but also because a lot of historical incidents have taken place, a lot of empires have risen and fallen. For example, after the Mauryans, we have had the Shungas, and then we have had the great Guptas. So all that experience has been sort of summarized in the writing of Shukraniti Sara. So this is a great advantage of the Shukraniti Sara, and because of this reason, in particular, Professor Sarkar lays great emphasis on the Shukraniti Sara of or Shukra Niti, rather than talking about Kautilya. Now, this is not to say that he has not talked about or touched upon Kautilya's Arthashastra at all. In fact, he has devoted an entire chapter in the positive background. Now, at this point, let me also clarify the connection between the Shukraniti translation by Professor Sarkar and this book that is visible on the screen beside uh, Bhupendra Babu. So, this is basically the positive background of Hindu sociology is an introduction to the English translation of Shukraniti by Professor Sarkar. So maybe for a sort of comparison, I would request you, Bhupendra Babu, to show the thickness of the two books so that people can understand, our audience can understand how the two books compare in terms of their volume, the introduction and the main work of translation. Yes. You are muted. You are muted.
Yeah, yeah, sorry. Yeah, so this is the original book. It's a 50-year-old book. Okay, it is not reprinted anymore. So this
Correct.
is the thickness of this book, and if you can see the pages, they are quite worn out and yellowish. So this is the thickness of this, and
This
this,
is the Shukraniti Sara, the
yeah,
translation work.
exact translation work, and this
Yes.
is the book. So it's almost double, or I think 2.5 times the size.
Yes. Yes. So this is the positive background of Hindu sociology. The
Yes.
introduction that Professor Sarkar wrote in order to sort of contextualize the translation of his Shukraniti Sara. Now, let us also remember that the Shukraniti Sara translation is an annotated translation, which means that it is not just a line by line or word by word, writing of the text into English, but it is also a running commentary that has been provided by Professor Sarkar as an annotation. Under each of these shlokas, he has basically coupled the shlokas into passages. So suppose the shlokas number 73 and 74 are there. So on a particular page, as I can see in front of me, the Shukraniti translation is open, just like Upendra Babu. So it is on the page 8 that 73 and 74, these two shlokas are clubbed together. And there is a particular superscript, number 2, for example, which leads us to the footnote. And in the footnote, you can get the annotation where Professor Sarkar provides a lot more detail about the technical terms as well as the context, the meaning, and the historical sort of incidents that can help us understand the statement of the shlokas in much more clearer light. So this is the style in which he has written, and at the end of the book there is a very detailed index, very helpful thing that has been created by Kumar Narendranath Laha, who was I think one of the colleagues and in fact a student of Professor Shankar, who had helped him create this. So the book is really a wonderful work of scholarship. Let me also say, to be honest, this is not really, a work that is an easy read because mainly of the annotations. So if you want to sort of get into the flow of reading this work, I would suggest that first you should ignore the annotations. You should simply go over the translations of the shlokas. So start with chapter 1. There is no a big foreword or introduction of sorts, because that has been all taken care of in the thick fat volume that is visible on the screen, the positive background of Hindu sociology. Therefore, you can directly go to chapter 1 of Shukraniti and start reading the English translation of the shlokas 1 to 3, 4 to 5, 5 to 7, and so on and so forth. and simply ignore the annotations at the first reading. Then, when you start reflecting on the work, what you have read, and especially when there are passages which seem sort of odd, sort of cryptic, only then in your second reading, I would suggest that you can read the annotations along with the translation. That will make the familiarity of this work much more easier. So this is my introduction about the Shukraniti, the translation, and I would definitely encourage you to read this book, challenging as it may be, daunting as it may sound, but it will be a very very useful and productive read. So please get your hands on this book and read it. By the way, I think we should also mention here that this book is not really available for free as a PDF. I mean, Govindra Babu can confirm this. Are you aware of any free copy?
Yes, the free copy is available in archive.org, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah, it is available in. Is it is
Okay, then
available?
fantastic. Then fantastic. Then you should get your hands on the free copy if that is something that you enjoy. But like I said, the style of the book may be a little old-fashioned and challenging at first. So simply avoid the annotations in the first reading, and maybe later on when you come back to the book, you can go through it. So, if you have any questions or comments, Ravindra Babu, on the translation, then maybe we can take it, and then we can go to the discussion of the introduction part. That is the positive background of Hindu sociology.
Yeah, actually, I don't have a lot of questions because actually, like I started reading 3 4 pages of the book, the Sukraniti itself,
Hmm.
Sukraniti. Okay.
Okay.
Uh, then actually I realized that actually I need to devise a way to read the book. It's like I
Okay.
have to create a master plan before I can even start reading the book itself, because I need to do a bit of pre-study to
Hmm.
actually understand the context, so that actually when I am
Hmm.
reading the pages, I'm able to actually connect the dots. Because
Right.
like we are not from the humanities background. Okay.
Okay.
So for us, like we do technical work. Okay. So we are not related
Hmm.
to specifically theory of sociology or ancient scripture.
Okay.
So that's why actually for me, like I need to devise a way to actually find how to
Hmm.
read the book, so that I'm able to actually understand the context, contents of it.
Okay.
It's
Okay. So
important.
let me help you by offering some insights from the book itself. Maybe that will generate more interest and make it easier to go into the book for both you as well as your audience. So, like I was saying, that Kautilya in his Arthashastra divides the whole of ancient Indian literature, the whole of Indian knowledge systems, into 4 parts. These 4 parts are respectively Trayi, Varta, Dandaniti, and Anvikshiki. So, what are these? Let me explain each of these one by one, because that will help us contextualize, the works that we are discussing in the uh, larger field of Indian knowledge systems. So, Trayi basically consists of what we can call the Moksha Shastra. Anybody who is desirous of leading, a religious life, somebody who wants to attain moksha, and especially immediately attain moksha, they want to directly go into the path of jnana, or divine knowledge, metaphysics. They would sort of concern themselves with the field called Trayi. And under Trai, as you can guess, the kind of books or treatises, the works that will fall are basically the Upanishads, the Brahma Sutra, and the Bhagavad Gita, and the elaborate, commentarial work. As you know, that there are lots and lots of commentaries by the great ancient acharyas as well as modern acharyas. So that would consist, the field of Trai. So anything that has to do with the attainment of moksha, the otherworldly life, not just in the other world or the hereafter, because in the Indian metaphysics, it is very much possible to become Jivan Mukta. So even if you want to become Jivan Mukta, you should go to the field of Trai. Next is Varta. So anybody who wants to take care of agriculture and business, commerce, basically, they should concern themselves with the treatises that fall under Varta. And then we have Anvikshiki, which is basically logic. And anybody, I mean, if somebody wants to get into the study of Trai, Moksha Shastra, somebody wants to get into the study of commerce and agriculture, somebody wants to get into the study of Dandaniti as well, they have to have this basic training in understanding syllogism, how logic works basically. So Anvikshiki is the field under which this entire field of Tarka Shastra falls. So all these texts, starting with Gautama's Nyaya Sutra, and then all the different commentaries that have been written on it, and shorter texts that have been written in order to elucidate the concept of logical analysis and a logical vada, which is basically an epistemological device, a way to know or arrive at right knowledge through conversation, through question and answer, through interrogation and investigation. So it is intellectual investigation, the method through which you can clarify your thoughts, you can get rid of woolly thinking and get at right knowledge. So that is the concern of Anvikshiki. And therefore, we are left with the fourth part, which is Dandaniti. So Dandaniti is anything that has to do with sociological, political, economic, and of course, the moral or ethical discourse. So that is where we are now discussing the Shukraniti Sara by Shukracharya. And of course, Professor Sarkar has elaborately discussed it in the introduction part, that is the positive background of Hindu sociology. In order to understand what Niti Shastra really is, let us go directly into a particular shloka from the first chapter of Shukraniti Sara. In the eighth shloka, which can be found on the second page of this book, the translated work of Professor Sarkar. Professor Sarkar's translation of Sukraniti. Second page, we have from the eighth shloka. Niti Shastra is thus defined as a synthetic, comprehensive, and generalized science, or rather art, of society, equivalent to sociology in the modern times in its wide sense. And hence, it should be considered equivalent to neither ethics nor a treatise on polity alone, but to a system of morals, social, economic, and political. So, see how ethics or the moral science is being connected with the field of social sciences here. So, basically, Shukracharya is telling us that social, economic, and political morals, or where social good, economic good, and political good actually lie, all that has been discussed in this Shastra. Therefore, it is called Niti Shastra. The word Niti is also interesting to understand in this regard. Niti comes from the same root as Naya, which means to lead. And this is the same word, or rather the same root, which is at the root of the word Neta or Nayaka. So somebody who leads us to, some good end, to a kind of social benefit, political benefit, economic benefit or prosperity, is a neta. And therefore the science or the shastra in which the path or the method or the right way of leading the masses to social, economic, and political benefit is described is called the Niti Shastra. So that is the definition of Niti Shastra according to Shukra Niti of Shukracharya. Then there is this very interesting thing that has been described in the shlokas 20 to 22. Here, Shukracharya is basically saying, and Professor Sarkar has translated it as this: are these sciences, this can be found on the third page, yes. So are these sciences of any avail, of any use, basically, to persons following their ordinary affairs or avocations, the vyavaharis, in supplying them with skill and intelligence? But on the other hand, without niti, or the system of moral philosophy, moral philosophy as defined just now, the social, economic, and political moral, um, the stability of no man's affairs can be maintained or guaranteed. Just as without food, the physical body of men cannot be maintained and preserved. So he draws a distinction between Niti Shastra or Danda Niti and the other three fields of knowledge, Moksha Shastra or Trai, Varta, that has to do with agriculture and commerce, and also Anvikshiki. So he very plainly says that even without getting into the nitty gritties of the textual analysis of Anvikshiki, one can really get to the essence of knowledge. Okay, one can know how to acquire right knowledge and understand things, understand concepts, and understand the ways of men and the world. He says that without even getting into the Purva Mimamsa of Jaimini, people can really observe how Karmakanda is happening. So how worship and the yagnas, the sacrifices are happening, and they can learn by observing. He also says that even without getting into the Vedanta texts, people can understand that this world is really a Maya, and in order to have eternal life, one has to go beyond this cycle of birth and death, and go beyond Maya. So people can really arrive at those understandings, those realizations, without getting into the nitty gritties of the texts of, let's say, Anvikshiki or Purva Mimamsa or Vedanta, these darshanas. But one cannot at all function in the world, in the practical world, without getting into the knowledge of, or without acquiring the knowledge of Niti Shastra or Danda Niti. That is why Danda Niti is essential. It is the fundamental block of education, and this is basically laid out as the most important plank of educational methodology or pedagogy for children, and especially for those who will be functioning in the world, people like political leaders, people like governors and rulers. So this is how he has contextualized and differentiated, given a special place to Niti Shastra. Shukracharya has given this special place to Niti Shastra. So I think this helps us understand the subject matter of the book a little better. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you give a uh, great help to us to actually give us the framework. So, like, because I am not from the humanities background, so I did not know this correct classification of a Trey, Varta, Anvishiki, and Dandaniti. So, like, although I have read Upanishads and few other texts which are quite interesting, specifically Mandukya Upanishad and especially, so that is, it actually gives me a bit curious about life and who I am. But I think thank you. I think it gave me a lot of help to actually understand and contextualize the readings and the text, and also for the audience who want to read it and how they should read it. Like Trey is part of Upanishad and Moksha. That's something that I did not know because I am not a priest. So it's very important. I have just one question. So I actually,
Okay.
when I doing research, I there were a lot of few contexts and questions regarding
Hmm.
Mahabharata and Shukranitis. Like,
Okay.
is there this, like, could you shed more light into that part? Like, is that a relationship is there between Mahabharata and Shukranitis as a text?
Definitely, yes, and this is a very interesting thing to consider because, like I said, that the text of Shukraniti has been placed by Professor Sarkar as a later phenomena compared to the Arthashastra of Kautilya. Now, as we all know, that Kautilya was contemporary to Chandragupta Maurya, and therefore we can place it in the the preliminary centuries, sorry, the final centuries coming to the before Common Era. So it would be somewhere around the fourth and the third centuries BCE, when Kautilya's Arthashastra was being compiled, let's say, and maybe it came to a final shape by the time we came to the first century of the Common Era. Now, the mention to Shukracharya is already visible in the Mahabharata, especially when we talk about the Shanti Parva, where Shanti Parva and Anushasana Parva, which is again an elaborate treatise. If we just take these two books of the Mahabharata, the Shanti and the Anushasana books, the Parvas, then we can say that these two books comprise an independent text in Dandaniti itself. So they would be placed side by side with the Arthashastra of Kautilya or the Shukraniti Sara of Shukracharya, or Kamandaka's Niti Sara. This is an even later day author and text, and basically a summary of Kautilya's Arthashastra. So all these authors were sort of summarizing the works of their Purvacharyas, or the acharyas or master that have preceded them. This is a kind of peculiar quality of Indian tradition, the Indian knowledge traditions, that whatever knowledge is available from the oral sources or from written sources in the pothis, the manuscripts, that has to be not only copied and therefore preserved, but also they have to be summarized. And sometimes these summaries would come with annotations or commentaries, just like Professor Sarkar in the modern age has created annotations of the Shukraniti. So this is how the scholarship has progressed in India. Now we can almost immediately understand how then the Mahabharata quotes Shukracharya, or at least mentions the name of Shukracharya, and the fact that he is quite well connected in the field of Dandaniti along with other acharyas like Brihaspati. Of course, Kautilya is not mentioned in Mahabharata, but Brihaspati as Devaguru, or the teacher, the mentor of the Devatas, and Shukracharya, who's a son of Brigu, and who's the teacher or mentor of the Asuras or the Purva Devatas. Okay, so because basically the Asuras are said to be the siblings of the Devatas, so therefore they are and they are born before the Devatas, so therefore they are called Purva Devatas. So both Brihaspati and Shukra find a mention in the Anushasana Parva, Shanti Parva discussion between Yudhishthira and Bhishma, where Bhishma is teaching Yudhishthira about how to run a government, how to run the state, and what sort of qualities Yudhishthira must acquire in order to become a successful leader of the people. So we can understand that the tradition of Shukra as a distinct school of thought in the Dandaniti field was already quite well established during the time of the Mahabharata, which is basically the late Dwapara Yuga. Mahabharata battle, the Mahabharata war basically takes place towards the end of the Dwapara Yuga, and right after the war has finished, we find that after the death of Krishna, not immediately after, but after the war has been over and peace has been established, and several years of reign by Yudhishthira, Sri Krishna dies, and it sort of marks the beginning of Kali Yuga. So this is at the cusp of the Dwapara and the Kali Yuga. In order to place it according to the Indian conception of time, that Shukracharya's school of thought is already well known by the rulers, the administrators who are actually practicing this particular field. But like I said, it has always been the practice of Indian scholars in order to first of all copy, preserve, and therefore annotate, commentate on those texts, that this particular work may have been compiled and recompiled finally by the 5th or 6th century, when Professor Sarkar really traces the time of the Shukraniti text, which he has translated, and this is basically a translation from a manuscript that was, transformed into a published text edited by a German scholar named Dr. Gustav Oppert. This he did in 1882. So, and the translation came out in the year 1900. Um, just a second. Let me give you the exact year of the publication of this book. So it was first published in 1914, 1900, 14. So you can see that a good 30 years had passed between the publication of the text, the Sanskrit text, edited version of it by Dr. Gustav Oppert, who did it for the Madras government in 1882, and the publication of it in translated form in English translation by Professor Sarkar. So this is a kind of timeline and life of the text called Shukraniti.
Yeah, oh yeah. I think this was something which I think I was waiting for, the audience is waiting for. So maybe I think we would need to have few more sessions to actually go deeper into this. So we'll get to that stage. Now, for the audience and for me as well, because I was reading part of it. I read it online on YouTube, two sessions. Then I read few more privately. So if somebody says, okay, what is Hindu sociology? Okay, and why, as an Indian or as a student or as a curious person, why somebody should read Hindu sociology, and why this specific book? Okay, so could you give that person a kind of a introduction that why should be helping him individually? Okay, to actually read the book and gain more out of his learning.
Right. So Hindu sociology is nothing but the entirety, the collection of the works by Hindu thinkers across ages, starting with people like Brihaspati and Shukra, and then coming down to Bhishma, and then, of course, Kautilya, and finally, in the forms of other texts like the Shukraniti, which we are discussing today, and also a very important text which I have mentioned earlier, the Niti Sara of Kamandaka. So these are basically the works which can be taken together to form the basis of Hindu sociology. Now, is Hindu sociology any different from sociology as a modern discipline? Well, both yes and no. Yes, because the subject matter, the proper interest of Hindu sociology is the same as the subject matter or interest of the field or discipline called sociology that we study in modern times. It is something that has come to us from the middle of the 19th century, especially from the works of the French philosopher Comte, Auguste Comte. So, and we will see that the title positive, the title of this book by Professor Sarkar called Positive Background of Hindu Sociology contains the word positive. It is actually borrowed by Professor Sarkar from Auguste Comte's vocabulary. So, how does Comte define the word positive? Let me comment on that. That will help us understand and contextualize Hindu sociology better. So, positive is all things that is materialistic, that is concerned with this world and not with the other world. So, it is not idealistic, it is not otherworldly, it is not spiritual, it is not mystical. Everything that has to do with the mystical, the spiritual, the otherworldly, that has to do with moksha, we find in the field called Trayi, from the fourfold division of Indian knowledge systems, as given in Kautilya's Arthashastra, which I mentioned. And everything that falls under the concerns of this world that has to do with the material prosperity of human beings, and especially with a large number of human beings. We are not talking only about the individual human beings prosperity. Of course, it is related to the subject matter of Dandaniti or Hindu sociology in a sort of organic way, because as Shukra himself declares in the Shukraniti, in the first chapter itself, which we were reading a while ago, that the well-being of the individual ruler or the individual politician, he may also be an amatya, who is basically a minister. It's not necessary that you only have to be a prince or king, which in the context of ancient India was often determined by birth, not always, but often determined by birth. So therefore, one may think that okay, so I am not from a royal family, I am not an aristocrat. How does this subject, interest me? How is it relevant for my concerns? So to answer that question, I would say that Shukra directly addresses anybody who is in the business of governance, anybody who is in the business of administration or ruling a large, area of land, region, and whose decisions are going to directly impact the lives of the masses, large number of people. They should concern themselves with the Niti Shastra or Danda Niti. And therefore, the well-being of the leader, well-being of the king, well-being of the governor, well-being of the minister, all these individuals, con- you know, uh, considering them as individuals, their well being is intricately connected to the well being of the masses. If they fail to guarantee the prosperity of the masses, then it won't be very long before they themselves will be directly affected. And this is something that we have seen all across history. This is a universal phenomenon. This is not only peculiar to India or ancient Indian society. We have seen this happening in ancient Europe, in ancient Greece and Rome. We have seen this in medieval Europe, in places like England, where Reformation took place, and there were bloody, wars going on, and especially Griha Yuddha going on. Um, and civil wars, and then of course, coming down to the very dawn of modernity, the French Revolution had directly impacted the ruler, the French monarch, King Louis XVI, and his entire family was executed. If we come down even closer to our times, in 1917, 18, 1919, the Russian Revolution, those 3 turbulent years, we saw what happened to the family of the Tsar. They were directly executed. And why that happened? That happened simply because the Tsar and his family, they got too self-centric. They were obsessed with their own narrow interests, and they sort of lost sight of the common good. And therefore we can actually relate what has been said by Shukracharya, if we indeed agree with the view of Professor Sarkar, that it is Shukracharya's voice which has percolated through the centuries, through the ages, from time immemorial down to the actual text which we are reading now in the form of Shukraniti Sara, something that has been compiled and taken a final shape in the 5th or 6th century Common Era. So it is the positive element, or that is to say, the materialistic, the this worldly, the economic, the sociological aspects of life. It has to do with anything starting from our day-to-day lives, our amenities, public amenities, as well as the law in a very important manner. So there is a very interesting equation or parallelism that Professor Sarkar has drawn between European thinkers and Indian thinkers, especially between the Emperor Justinian's minister, who was basically responsible for writing the code of law of Justinian, somebody called a Tribonian. So he said that Chandragupta is basically the Indian counterpart of Justinian, or vice versa. And Tribonian was the European counterpart of Kautilya, the minister of Chandragupta. So Chandragupta was basically following the order of his emperor, maybe because he himself had advised the emperor. As we all know very famously, that the emperor himself was a student, a pupil of Minister Chandragupta. So, sorry, Minister Kautilya. And therefore, Chandragupta had given a sort of decree that all the juridical uh, statements and knowledge that has been in existence up till his time have to be compiled together in a single code of law. This is the same thing that had happened in ancient Rome when Emperor Justinian had ordered, his ministers in order to codify the laws, existing laws, and that is what Tribonian had done. So that's why there is a parallelism between, these two individuals, or rather, a set of two individuals, Chandragupta and Justinian, and Kautilya and Tribonian. So that is what positive means in the title of the positive background of Hindu sociology. I would just add one more thing before maybe we can get into a more conversational discussion, is that the positive, as explained by the French philosopher Auguste Comte, because it is basically his invention, the coinage is Comte's. In Comte's philosophy, we get to see a kind of progression or evolution in several stages for humankind. This is something that Professor Sarkar does not agree with. He does not agree with a kind of evolutionary development of humankind, just as Comte has given. So he does not really agree with that methodology or that framework through which he has explained history, but he has simply taken the term positive. So positive would mean something that has to do with the materialistic, the sociological, economic, political, this worldly. And the Hindus were no different from any people across any historical time, uh, anywhere in the earth, in terms of their ambitions, in terms of their interest and their involvement in the this worldly, subjects. There is a false view that ancient Hindus and even the medieval Hindus were single-mindedly and single-pointedly concerned about moksha, and that has given rise to a false Indology. Directly, Professor Sarkar has used this term, false Indology, which really came through the works of the early Indologists, starting from Max Muller to Senar to Max Weber, from early 19th century to early 20th century. Through almost 150 years of Indological scholarship, these the classical Indology scholars, they had given rise to this conception, this misconception rather, that the ancient Hindus are single-mindedly obsessed with spiritual, mystical, otherworldly things, and they had nothing to do with this worldly, practical and materialistic life or ambitions. So that is something that has been demolished by Professor Sarkar, because he has gathered a lot of data in this particular book, The Positive Background of Hindu Sociology. That's why he called it the positive background. The word background is also quite significant. He says that for the Indian civilization, for the Hindu civilization in particular, it is the religious or the spiritual aspect of life that is at the foreground, but that does not remain floating in void. There is always the positive or materialistic background against which this spiritual foreground is really situated. So that's what positive means.
Yes. So, like as and also, I think this specific part also we had discussed in our reading streams. That specific point regarding the spiritual aspect of it. And we have
Hmm.
correct, we had varnashram. We have four varnashrams. The moksha is the
Right.
last of the varnashrams. When you are done your duty, for the material well-being of yourself, for the family, and also for the
Mm.
society. Only then
Correct.
you go and do go towards moksha, not when you are born itself.
Mhm.
So that's why Professor Benoy Kumar Sarkar has said this is a false sociology itself.
Yes, yes, true. And in fact, it is not just from the times of Kautilya or Shukracharya that we got to know that life should be like this, that one should actually aspire for these material ambitions. Once that has been fulfilled, only then the otherworldly concerns should concern us. But right from the very beginning of philosophical thought in India, right from the dawn of darshanas, in the Upanishads, if we take the Upanishads as the dawn or the beginning of philosophical thinking, we see that in the Yajurveda, we have this very famous Upanishad, uh, Ishopanishad. I think you have read it. You were mentioning some of the
Yes,
Upanishads which are your favorite.
yes,
So in the Ishopanishad, which can be considered as one of the early Upanishads, because it is part of the Yajurveda, uh, we see that very categorically it utters a kind of wish, or rather it offers human beings a kind of ambition to live for 100 years, and after living 100 years one can have a fulfillment of their life. So what does that mean? It really means that one should be healthy and prosper. They should have prosperity, they should prosper in life. Otherwise one cannot really survive for 100 years, especially in ancient times when we did not have modern antibiotics and medicine. So it was really difficult for a human being to maybe reach even half that age, 50 years of ayu, or length of life could be regarded as a very long life. But the Yajurveda is placing before humankind a kind of aspiration or goal to live for 100 years. And also it is very significant that the Ishopanishad of Yajurveda talks about tyaga through bhoga. So the very first opening verse, the opening mantra of the Ishopanishad says, Tena tyaktena bhunjitha, which means thou shalt enjoy through sacrifices. So that means that sacrifice and enjoyment, these are not oppositional terms, they are not perpetually set against each other, but they are more like they are complementary terms, they're complementary ideas, and they're complementary practices. So one cannot think of enjoyment without sacrifice, and vice versa. So this sort of a very this worldly orientation of life, which had taken care of both the spiritual as well as the material, was there from the very beginning.
yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So now we will move back to a third phase of the conversation. So for the modern people like me, you, and other people, okay, in the modern context, okay, how the Shukranitti principles and its translations and its annotations and commentaries which are written on them,
Hmm.
reading them now for me as an individual, okay, or even for
Hmm.
a society as a whole, okay, how it would benefit us as a society, as an individual, okay, and especially how do we connect the Hindu part of Hindu sociology to Shukriti?
Okay. So, first of all, a close perusal or close, careful reading of Shukraniti and Professor Sarkar's translation of Shukraniti, as well as his introduction to the book in Positive Background of Hindu Sociology, will help us understand that we moderns are not very different from the ancient Hindus. That is the most important thing to understand, or collect from this these two works. So what do I mean when I say that the ancients were not very different from the moderns? The ancients, we often think, and again this is a result of this flawed ideology of people like Max Muller, Senar, and Max Weber, that we tend to associate the ancient Hindus as people who are ascetics, who are maybe living outside of society, who live in forests, and the only thing that they are thinking about is how to attain moksha, and go beyond the cycle of birth and death. So basically, we tend to associate very negative kind of connotations with the ancient Hindus by thinking of them as escapists from the challenges of life. And this also gives birth to a kind of flawed understanding of Hindu history or Indian history as a whole, when we think that okay, because the ancient Hindus were obsessed with the other world, they have not taken care of the concerns of the present world, or the material world, and therefore they have not created any lasting saga. They have not really gone on to create and establish great empires. They have not sort of taken care of protecting their borders, and therefore all sorts of foreign invaders that have come and they have run over us. This is really a false way of looking at Indian history, which again arises from the false Indology by people like Max Muller and Weber and Senna. And secondly, we also get to understand that the modern aspirations in running a state in a proper manner, in ensuring a welfare state which will take care of the basic necessities of the masses, in terms of food security, in terms of giving them basic education, and also in terms of giving them a dignified life, so that they have a security of job and occupations. These were the concerns of ancient Indians, and this is very well illustrated in the Dandaniti texts, especially in the Shukraniti. So when we read the Shukraniti, we get to see that the challenges pertaining to economic and political aspects of statecraft are dealt head on, and because the text has been really created as a result of the experience of political and economic activities of at least 2000 years of experience, the scholarly experience as well as the practical experience of the administrators. So we get a lot of data in terms of how to actually uh, tackle real world problems. So these real world scenarios just become more and more complex, but their nature at their very fundamental level remain the same. So those problems are relatable, and our policymakers can first of all orient their attitude towards a very indigenous way of thinking, if they ground their thinking in texts like Shukraniti and Arthashastra, and also maybe the Shanti Parva conversation, Anushasana Parva conversation between Bhishma and Yudhishthira. And therefore, they can much more confidently talk about an Indian way or an Indian response to the challenges of modernity, to all sorts of challenges of sustaining the resources, of sustaining livelihood, dignified life, offering people opportunities. All these things are rooted not just in the SDGs or the Millennium Goals as set by the UN, but they are right from the very beginning of empires in Hindu history. So looking at that should give us a kind of assurance that our ancients have dealt with these kind of problems, and because they have successfully dealt with them, it gives us a kind of confidence that we can also do it in our contemporary times.
Yes. So, like from our perspective, like we see the Middle Ages as kind of dark ages. Then we see the pre-industrial and industrial age where we have made a lot of progress. So, like because we don't have a lot of long memory, so we can't see beyond the Middle Ages. And Middle Ages is all about dark ages, so dark practices. Okay, lack of science, superstition, all these things were there. So it's important for us to actually to connect like people who are domain experts like you, who could give us this perspective, which is very important to actually tell us and teach us that we as humans, okay, are as similar as Romans or Greeks or ancient Indians. Okay. And we had the same kind of needs which they had, and they have already dealt with it because they also had empires across continents. Okay. Even the Gupta Empire was quite big in terms of its spread of geography. Okay. And they had to invent tools. They had to invent in terms of policies to actually govern these places. And you cannot have these people done this without a proper framework. So it was there, already there. So this concept of, okay, the ancients were like backward in terms of what they were doing is something which is a misnomer, and that is being spread by Max Muller and other individuals specifically. So we'll come to our last part of the discussion, okay, and that would be regarding Shukraniti as a text. So if you can give us maybe one or two shlokas which actually relate to our lives right now or in modern times, so that people would be able to actually connect with the uh, shlokas itself, like if possible for
Right.
you. Hmm.
Yes, yes, definitely, because the Shukraniti is full of such situations. So I am quickly reminded of some passages from the 11th chapter, chapter number from the second chapter, really, where Shukra is talking about how the unit of family becomes a kind of basic fencing, the basic fortification in the face of aggressions that slowly creep into the society. So, how is he talking about it? He says, on page number 81, you can find it, the passages starting from 333 to 354. He talks about the setting in which there is the village, and of course the family or the household is basically the unit of the village, and the village also has a chief who is the local sort of the panchayat head or something in today's terms. So the chief is the person who will mete out punishment if there is some kind of grievance for any family. And this punishment should be exemplary in the sense that it should not annihilate the subject. So, see, it will not really sort of give the capital punishment by killing off, a perpetrator of crime, but something that will be not too lenient and not too cruel. So this again comes back to and relates to, connects to our modern discourses of whether capital punishment should be there or not. And in fact, we get to see that in backward societies, especially with fanatic societies like in Afghanistan, where there is Taliban rule, or sometimes even in Bangladesh, we get to see that because the Islamists are running amok at this time, there are horrible cruelties that are meted out to people, and especially when there are political grievances, when there are even petty criminal grievances. Maybe there is a thief who has committed an act of robbery or theft. Their hands are chopped off because it is some kind of religious instruction according to religious law. So people tend to think that because this sort of backwardness is really a function or result of being situated in the medieval ages or the dark ages or even before that, we should really look at the kind of statements that are given in Shukraniti, where Shukra clearly says that the head of the village, like the father and the mother. So first of all, this is something that we should consider, that the leader should look upon their subjects as their children. So the basic unit of family, once again, like I was saying, that it should be seen as the basic model for our thinking, our orientation towards how we administer justice, how we administer good governance. So the concept of good governance will start when the ruler or the administrator or even the local councillor or panchayati head of panchayat will think of themselves not just as somebody external to whatever is happening, whatever situation has arisen, as he is dealing with, but it will help and become much more organic, much more humane if that particular person, the leader, thinks of himself as the head of the family. So just like a father and the mother who treat their errant children, they should also deal with all these grievances, be they criminal grievances, be they other kinds of grievances, maybe something to do with land and property dispute. He also says that the gardener collects flowers and fruits after having duly nourished the trees with care. The collector of taxes should be like him. So, when it comes to taxing the middle class, because one has to really run freebie sort of politics, and because one has to promise many free schemes of giving cash and doles, we always get to hear this kind of complaint from especially the middle classes who are unduly taxed, who are unduly burdened. So here, basically, Shukra, an ancient thinker from India, is giving us a principle, an attitude, an orientation as to how the tax collector or even the policymakers who determine how the taxes will be taken, what portion of wealth should be taken as taxes from the masses of different classes. He says that his attitude should be like the gardener. The gardener does not take away all the flowers or does not take away much of the flower. He always knows that only a little portion of it has to be taken so that the tree remains in a healthy condition so that it can bear more flowers and fruits. So these are some situations. I just gave two kind of instances, one that has to do with the jurisprudence and another that has to do with taxing. So and these two are always relevant. So when we are talking about a modern society, it is not much different from how the ancients were dealing with situations and also thinking about solutions. So these can be two great examples.
Yeah, I think thank you, because the examples you gave are quite relevant to us in coming where we times we live in, and the kind of taxes and other things we see on a political social outburst happens every now and then regarding the taxes which government takes and services which are provided. I think it's a
Mhm.
great introduction that you have given to us and to the audience also itself, that philosophy, and moral teachings and also politics, okay, they are an integral part of our society and who we are, okay, they all are
Yes.
interconnected. So our education system has created a kind of a categories, a
Mm.
kind of barrier, that
Yes.
somebody who knows mathematics, he doesn't have to know and appreciate poetry or non-fiction books or fiction books. So, but as you mentioned, correct, it is all about economics, it's all about society, it's all about morality, politics, and also economics. So they're all interrelated. We cannot
Mhm.
segregate them as such, because we have to live in a society where we have to interact with them. So learning them, understanding them is the right way to actually live in a society like an integrated portion, part of it, rather than being somebody who's already asking about why I'm paying taxes. We have to
True.
understand
True.
why I'm paying taxes, and I have to also understand that if we are taxed too much, I need to do to fix that problem, because it's all our responsibility. It is not the responsibility of the government, but we also have responsibilities in terms of what we need to do. Just shouting doesn't solve the problem in any case.
Very true.
Yeah,
Very true.
yeah, yeah. So we now I'm done with my question. So we'll take a few questions from
I'll,
audience.
before we go to the audience Q&A, let me just point out another very useful feature of the positive background of Hindu sociology, the introduction to the translation of Shukranitti by Professor Sarkar. So, among other things, apart from providing a lot of data on the material aspects and ambitions and imperialistic sort of endeavors by ancient Indian rulers and ancient Indian, states, the positive background of Hindu sociology draws our attention to a very useful method of understanding our history. It is so because in all our discussions about comparing Indian history with Western history, we often forget that the conception of India or Indian society as a backward society as compared to the Western societies is true only when we keep in mind that we are talking about the progress of the West in the last 200 or 200 to 50 years. This sense of history is often missing from people who compare the two societies. If we look at the kind of development, economic, political, and social development that had taken place in both India as well as Western Europe through the classical ages, ancient Greece, Rome, and ancient India, and also right through the medieval ages, coming down to the age of enlightenment. So only till the other day, just 300 years ago, the progress of these two societies, Western and Indian, were more or less at par. Okay, and that should be the starting point of any discussion for the sudden change in the Western society due to the scientific and technological advancement, especially with respect to the resources getting concentrated in certain Western European countries, and then, of course, later to North America. But that sort of concentration and that sort of sudden development, which has happened only in the last 200 or 250 years, is quite a sort of short period in time if we keep in mind the huge length of history that these two societies, Indian and Western society, they have lived parallelly. Okay, so in terms of the scientific and technological, social, political, economic developments that were taking place in the West, in classical and medieval Europe, was more or less the same. In fact, in certain cases, Indian development may be looked upon as much more sophisticated compared to what was happening in classical India. Even then, I wouldn't say that classical India or medieval India was somehow better than the more powerful sections of Western society. But something that is very, very clear is that there is hardly any difference in terms of the socio-political markers of development, of how we understand development in today's times. If we use those parameters, up until the time when the industrial revolution sort of burst forth in the Western European scenario, we'll see that Indian society's progress and the Western society's progress have been going parallelly, almost hand in hand. So that should tell us that these two societies were not really very different, that ancient India was not only thinking about moksha and spiritual emancipation, and that it was not only talking about the Upanishads and Vedanta, but it was also very excruciatingly involving itself in the matters of this world, in politics, in military expeditions. It had led great military expeditions. If we think of the great ages of empire of the Mauryans or the Guptans, and coming down to the southern kingdoms of Chola, and also of the Pala kings in Bengal, we see that all these people were very, very ambitious materially and politically. They were running empires, establishing empires, sometimes even beyond the natural borders of India. They were establishing greater India in Southeastern Asia, in places like, beyond Afghanistan, and sometimes even going far towards the Western Asia. So that sort of comparison, the historical comparative method of looking at Indian society's development and Western society's development is a very useful tool that sort of gives us a kind of sanity to make sense of what was going on in ancient and medieval ages before industrial revolution sort of created or inaugurated modernity.
Yes, I think you give a very important point that in terms of like development that we see, correct, just economic and political development itself. If you just compare two of them, the political influence and the economy that ancient India had was like quite gigantic, and it had far and wide effects. There are actually in Indian tradesmen, trade guilds having offices in Rome itself and in China for doing trade.
Yes,
Okay. So it means that it had a quite a bit of expansion, it got a bit of influence across the globe, like an ancient global world, we can see. Yeah, thank you for
correct.
this. So now we'll go for the questions, and I think
Sure.
we would need a few more sessions to actually get more elaboration on this, because it's a very interesting thing that we discuss, and people will be more understanding the context of it, because it's not a very easy thing for people to actually understand if they do not like read through it.
No,
So
definitely. Like I said in my during my talk, that neither of these books, The Positive Background of Hindu Sociology, nor the actual translation, are very easy reads. So I hope that through our discussion, people will garner more interest, and they will actually get into the book, and maybe then we can have many more questions. So let's see what sort of questions people have from our discussion.
yes, yes. So the first question is from Nina. He was so was he using European sociologists to understand India, or more reliant on other Indian sociologists or texts he mentioned?
Okay, so first thing is that when he is writing this book, the first edition of this book really came out in 1922, and the second edition came out in 1937. So at that time, we really did not have other Indian sociologists who were working extensively in this field. So in that sense, Professor Sarkar can be described as a pioneer in the field of sociology in India. The reason that he was referring to Western sociologists is that he, first of all, wanted to establish the fact that there is a false Indology, because of which there are so many misconceptions about India. And the prime misconception is that in ancient Indian society, medieval Indian society, not just Hindu India, but also during the Islamic periods, the concern of Indians was mainly about moksha, and mainly about mystical experiences, about the otherworldly experience. No. So, first of all, he wanted to establish that. He demolished the sociology that has, been created by the scholarship of people like Max Muller, the French Indologist Emile Senard, and also the great German sociologist Max Weber. So, because mainly of these three people, because their works were so impactful, so influential, that for almost 200 years, the West has been imagining India as a kind of place for ascetics only, and nothing material, nothing practical was happening there. So that, and also he has referred to a new Indology, the kind of Indology that he himself was producing through his papers, and finally through the works of works like this, the books that we are discussing today, Shukraniti translation and Positive Background of Hindu Sociology. The new sociology that he was trying to create had a kind of parallel development in some modern sociologists of the 20th century. He gives examples of the Russian American sociologist named Pitirim Sorokin, who basically wrote two works which are mostly important, which are of most importance, which are of great importance. And in these two works, one was a kind of a encyclopedic view of the sociological development across the ancient, medieval, and modern worlds. And the other one was really about, discussing the ideological part of different societies in the Western world as well as in the Eastern world, including China and India. So Sorokin's work really helped establish, the new trend in Indology, as parallel to what Professor Sarkar was trying to establish. He also found, this kind of new Indological research and new lines of thinking where India's practical aspect was acknowledged by the scholars themselves from outside of India in the works of certain German and Italian scholars. So he names people like Oldenburg, he names people like Hillebrand, German scholars who have created very important interventions which will help establish a new Indology that takes into account both the this worldly as well as the otherworldly aspects of life. He also mentioned some Italian works, especially I think the name of Formici, and there was another person. I'm really forgetting his name, but it will be here. Just let me pull up the name. Okay, apart from Formici, Bottazzi. These are the two people that he mentions from Italy. Formici had written a very impactful book in 1914, and Bottazzi also in the same year. These people sort of gave an echo of the thoughts of Professor Sarkar. And because of this, Professor Sarkar had a very good network with these scholars. His works were being published by publishers from their countries, in Italy and Germany, especially, also in the US. And he was sort of having exchanges with them in a scholarly way by critiquing their works. They were also commenting on his works. So that's how a new sociology, and more importantly, a new Indology was being crafted by Professor Sarkar. That's the reason why he is very closely interacting with the European sociology. And this also tells us that in our time today, in our contemporary times, we need to be actively engaged with works that are coming out of all sorts of sources from the West, from people who are writing in India, people who are trained by the West but are Indians and creating works. We should be very actively interacting with those works. We should be critiquing them, reading them, and maybe whenever we find echoes of our own thoughts, especially when we're working from a nationalist point of view, we should acknowledge them. We should thus forge a kind of scholarship that provides the Hindu experience, the insider's experience of the Indian civilization.
Yes, yeah, I think very well said. So I have one more question. I'll go one by one. So Shoptos is asking, what was Benoy sir's view on what should be the approach of Indian polity going ahead in future?
Right. So, important question, because Professor Sarkar tackles this issue of futurism in a very bold manner and very direct manner. So, he has another book called Futurism of Young Asia, where he is mainly commenting on countries like Japan, because Japan had imperialistic ambitions at that time when he was writing this. And China was also coming of age. So China was getting out of its medieval shackles and sort of very fast moving towards a modern polity, a modern republic. At that time we did not have the modern China. There was no communist China at that time, but China was grappling with many challenges. Yet, all the time, there was this consciousness in China that it has a future, it has a very distinct future, which will set it apart from the West. Professor Sarkar, because his connection with the Indian political scenario was close, because his educational reform and his revolutionary contribution in Indian scholarship and Indian educational scenarios were quite closely related to revolutionary politics. He was appreciative of the Indian revolutionaries, and he said that India should have imperialistic ambitions of its own, just like it used to have back in the day when the great empires were established by the monarchs like Chandragupta, the Gupta kings, or the Chola kings. So he was of the opinion that India should have a global ambition. It should try to become economically very, very powerful. It should become the powerhouse of Asia, and it must collaborate with other Asian powers. Now, at that time, for Professor Sarkar, it was not probably possible to see what sort of course history will take in Asia, especially in connection with Japan and China. We know that Japan had been badly defeated in the Second World War, and that the country was attacked by the USA. There was the explosion of the nuclear bomb, which basically decimated its sovereignty and its self confidence in a manner. And China, of course, imported a Western ideology, but sort of assimilated it and created a new kind of empire out of it. So those considerations have been absent for obvious reasons, because Professor Sarkar did not live beyond the 1940s. But he definitely talks about the necessity of keeping very high ambitions, materially speaking. So it's I think that if he were alive today, he would not be satisfied with just the proliferation of soft power as far as India is concerned. I think he would be advocating very strongly for hard power, something which India is making. Small steps. It's taking small steps and progressing rather slowly compared to her other Asian counterparts, especially China. So uh, Professor Sarkar, I think, would have been very, very critical of the sloth in India's acquiring of economic and military power. I think he would be critical, and I think he would be boldly advocating India's global ambitions, India's ambitions of dominating, first of all, the Southern Asian region, and also all of Asia. It would be a kind of advocacy for a real Vishwaguru, rather than Vishwaguru status based only on soft power. So nowadays we have the idea of India having a lot of soft power because it is kind of importing yoga and spirituality to the West, which is again quite uh, illusory, I think, because it is not India which is importing yoga and spirituality to the West any longer. It is rather the other way around, where the West has sort of almost, I won't say it has completely assimilated, but it has almost assimilated. It is on the verge of completely assimilating yoga and spirituality, especially with regard to Hinduism and Buddhism. And the flow has now, shifted. It is now coming from the West towards India, and Indians are in awe, especially the Indian middle class and Indian leadership, because the leadership also mostly come from the middle class. Exceptions are there. Our Prime Minister, Honorable Prime Minister himself, is not from the middle class background, but his ministry, his cabinet, and the bureaucracy, the whole bureaucracy, which is basically the framework through which he has to run the country, comes from that middle class background. And because it comes from that background, it shares the same attitudes, it shares the same aspirations as the middle class of India. So it's still the middle class of India is in awe of the West. It aspires to send its children to the West, to get them educated in the West, and they themselves aspire to have a better life in the West. And instead of sort of taking responsibility of making changes happen in this country. So I think Professor Sarkar would have been very, very critical of all of this, being the person that he was, and he would have advocated for a strong India, something that can be described as a Vishwaguru in material terms, in positive terms. Because we are discussing positive background of Hindu sociology, I think he would have advocated for this worldly, materialistic, economic, sociological, political power for India, hard power for India.
Yes. So actually, while we were talking, I in the screen you can see Hindu culture as world power. So this is the, I think he wrote a few articles which were collected and published as a book. So and this book has an introduction by let me just check. Dr. Gautam Shen, who is a former diplomat. He has written a forward to this, and actually I have this book. Actually, it's a very interesting book.
Let me
To
just
also,
correct you by saying. Let me just correct you by saying that Dr. Shane, Dr. Gautam Shane, was an intellectual, and he was an academic and not a diplomat, because he has taught in the LSE. I think it is the same person that you're talking about.
Uh, yeah, yeah. Yes. Same person. Actually, in one of the interviews, somebody mentioned as diplomat. So that's what I thought. Okay, he might
Oh,
be
I
diplomat.
see. Maybe I'm
Yeah,
not
but
aware.
no. Actually, no. You might be right. So, like, see, we don't have time to do all the research as one. So I think we learn from each other. So I will also check regarding this, because I was reading the way he wrote the things. I thought he was a diplomat. The way he wrote about his writing.
Oh, definitely. That is maybe because he was a professor of international relations. So,
Hmm.
the world of diplomacy would be his bread and butter, I think, because he is an expert on that field. So, his way of scholarship and his sort of discourses will reflect that.
Yes. So we'll go to our next question. Next question is from again Saptorshi. What was Benoy sir's impression about Western polity via vice versa the Indian polity?
Vis-a-vis Indian politics. So I
Yeah,
have
yeah.
already answered this question when I was
Hmm.
talking at the very last part of our pre-Q&A discussion. I said that when we are talking about comparing Western society, ancient, classical, or medieval Western society with the Indian classical and medieval societies, we should keep in mind that their progress in all sorts of material parameters, economic, sociological, political, were going hand in hand. So the development was not very disproportionately different from each other. So, in terms of even scientific and technological innovation, military innovation, about military expedition, especially, Professor Sarkar has given us a lot of details, because he has culled out a lot of information from the ancient Indian states, and specifically the empires that ancient India had established, ancient as well as medieval India. He even talks about the Mughal empire. So the progress of Indian society in terms of all material parameters, when they are compared with the same time as they were happening or unfolding in the Western society, are more or less the same. And in certain cases, I think, as we have indicated, as you have also pointed out, that India had surpassed, sometimes, especially when it came to generating technological advances, military advances in those regards, and in the expanse of the Indian empire, establishment of Greater India. In those regards, India had, in certain cases and in certain episodes of ancient and medieval history, surpassed the Western nations. It's only from the late 17th and early 18th century that this starts to change. In the last 200 to 250 years, we have seen a sort of unnatural accumulation of material resources in the Western European nations, and later on in North America, in the US. And that's why the technological progress has been disproportionately faster and better compared to modern India. So if unless we keep that historical comparative context in mind, we are going to believe that India has always been a backward society, which is not the case. All sorts of social parameters also, for example, the social stratification, something that we in our country call as caste, and often India is berated by saying that India is a backward country because it has caste stratification, it has a caste system. But I think Professor Sarkar and also the other European sociologists that he has referred to, whose works he had referred to, like Sorokin, have pointed out that caste was as much a reality in ancient as well as medieval West European societies. He, in fact, refers to a particular quotation from, I think, one of the German scholars, where he mentions that England's Richard II, King Richard II, uh, gives an explicit decree saying that the bonded laborers, the bonded slaves, they cannot send their children to educational institutions. So that in effect basically stops their social upward mobility. And sometimes, because many people attack us by saying that India has been a backward caste ridden country, and therefore the Shudras did not have access to education, etc. I think this should be kept in mind, even if it is true in certain cases. The same sort of social status quo prevailed in the so-called developed countries of Europe. So when we are talking about ancient and medieval Europe and ancient and medieval India, their situations were not very different from each other. Uh, Bhupendra Babu, I think you are muted.
Yeah. Yeah. So actually, I think we need to do a separate discussion on the caste itself. So that we will plan it later. I think Benoy Sarkar talks a lot about caste in the fluidity of caste actually, not caste itself, but also how caste was fluid in terms of somebody could become a Brahmin or a Shudra or a Kshatriya based on the karma that he has done. So this
Correct.
fluidity of caste which was there in Indian society was quite unique actually. It was not there in European context or even in American
No,
context.
no, no. Here I have to disagree with you. In fact, the comparative study that Professor Sarkar has presented here in the positive background, he basically says that this fluidity is actually a feature of all societies, and he has actually borrowed here from the Russian American sociologist Sorokin's work, whose work I have mentioned already. He says that in certain societies, this fluidity or mobility, rather, happens at a faster rate compared to other societies. So, in certain points in history, in India, the mobility was happening faster than, let's say, Italy or England. And in certain other episodes of Indian history or world history, taken as a whole, the mobility of different social groups, occupational social groups, which we now call jati or caste, really, these were progressing upward or backward. Both ways it was happening. One can go up as well as groups can go down. This was happening in India in a slower rate compared to European countries. So it is not really a very fixed kind of phenomenon, but it is universal. It is not just happening in India that different social groups had upward or downward social mobility. It was also happening in Europe. This is something that Professor Sarkar has actually shown us in the positive background.
Yeah, because actually I had read a part of the book by Ram Narayan Rawat who talks about the Chamar caste. Uh,
Okay.
yeah, so like that I saw, but I did not know that okay, this was kind of like universal phenomena across the society itself. But
Yeah,
maybe that's
actually the example that Professor Sarkar gives is from ancient Rome and medieval England. So they had the guild system for different occupational groups. So these guilds were not fixed in terms of the social status or privilege that they enjoyed. In certain cases, they were at the early stages of the ancient Roman or medieval England society, medieval English society. Certain occupational groups had higher privileges and greater status compared to others, but with time they had gone down, just like the varna, or sometimes in modern context it will be even called jati. The varna of Brahmin has been always a very elevated kind of privileged group. But in terms of the material opportunities that the Indian state provides, now it can be described as something that has gone down. If somebody is a Brahmin, someone does not have a special privilege from the Indian state. So this kind of upward and downward mobility is also a universal phenomenon across all societies. That is the observation of Professor Sarkar.
thank you for that. So one more question is from wasn't Professor Benoy sir also a great stalwart who facilitated and proliferated economics literature in Bengali language?
Yeah, I mean, he was quite important in this regard in sort of uh, establishing economic studies, but he was not quite a pioneer. I think even before him, people like Shotish Chandra Mukhopadhyay, his mentor, uh, have used to run this magazine called the Dawn magazine, and in this Dawn magazine, different people, starting from R.C. Dutt, Ramesh Chandra Dutt, who had actually translated the Rig Veda, uh, uh, and several other people, not just Professor Sarkar, they had emphasized the statistical studies, that maybe in today's times will be called econometrics. So this kind of econometric scholarship, data-driven economic policy and economic surveys and economic history also, was something that had already been established by Acharya Satish Chandra Mukherjee's Dawn magazine. So, yes, Binoy Sarkar had basically been inspired by the activities of the Dawn Society and the Dawn magazine specifically, and his sociological researches reflect that reality, that inspiration, that his sociology is data driven, it is fact based. He is, very, very keen on collecting as much data as possible on Indian history, so that it is not only in the realm of idealistic history that we are talking about, but it is factual or data-driven history that Professor Sarkar talks about, and his sociology is based on that sort of data-driven history.
Yeah, so this is a very important question. I think this is the best question that we have today, as of now. Uh, okay, would like to know Srijit sir's view on Binoy sir's interpretation of positivism and whether it had any influence in his later Bengali work, Hindu Rashtriya Gothan.
Yeah, I think even though not specifically, but we have touched upon this issue because we talked about the idea of positive. What really is meant by the term positive, and how much of the idea of Komta has been borrowed by Professor Sarkar. So, like we said, I will just repeat that positive here has been taken only in its materialistic, its this worldly, its practical sense, and not in the sense of Comte's different stages of human evolution. He does not talk about that. He does not refer to that because it does not agree with that sort of deterministic view of human history. So that is the sense in which he uses the term positive, and that is positivism also. And so far as the influence of this view of positivism on Hindu Rashtra Gronan is concerned, I think that this futurism that we talked about, that how India should have a kind of bold outlook, a confident outlook, something that is not just dependent on its Brahma principle. By Brahma principle, I mean, the realm of ideas and ideology, but also on the factual or practical aspect of life, which can be described as the Kshatra principle. So the Kshatra principle and the Brahma principle can be taken as a kind of dialectic, the polar opposites, which are complementary also, and which react on each other in order to make history progress. This is a very Hegelian view of historical development, but this is something that is hinted in the works of Professor Sarkar. So he definitely talks about that sort of collaboration, between the this worldly Kshatra principle and the otherworldly Brahma principle. He says that these two must work hand in hand in order to give rise to the ideal Hindu Rashtra, which is really nothing but the ideal Indian Republic that one can think of. So this Hindu Rashtra is not an exclusionary kind of space; it is an inclusive space, but it is something that is based on the fundamental principles of Dharma. And when we say Dharma, often the ideas of otherworldliness comes to mind, and that is where I think positive background of Hindu sociology will be immensely helpful in understanding that by a dharmic civilization we do not only mean yoga, Vedanta, and Sankhya, but we also mean Dandaniti, and we also mean a kind of humane and practical attitude towards the affairs of statecraft, the affairs of society as a whole. So I think uh, this would be my answer to that question.
Thank you. So this is something even I do not know. So did Benoy sir ever comment on utilitarian in his works? That's a, I think.
Utilitarianism, not in
Hmm.
particular. This is something that this is a debate that we can see even more prominently in Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay's works, because Bankim Chandra was also deeply inspired by the French philosopher Auguste Comte, who has coined the term positive and positivism. So utilitarianism and positivism are the two philosophies with which Bankim Chandra talks about in his Dharma, you know, which is again a very, very important text in trying to understand the dharma based civilization which we just referred to, Dharma Tattva and Krishna Charitra. So these two works are where we get to see a kind of detailed discussion and a kind of tension between positivism and utilitarianism, but not specifically in Binoy Sarkar. No, because Binoy Sarkar only borrows the terminology positive from Comte, and as long as any terminology is able to help clarify the conceptions of the realities of Hindu history, uh, he will borrow them. He will not really sort of hinge himself upon a particular philosophical view. He is, in fact, creating a new philosophy, the new Indology that we just talked about, which comes as a result of the sociological work done by Professor Sarkar in the positive background of Hindu sociology, is really his contribution to the philosophy, which is known as Sarkarism. So this Sarkarism is nothing but the view about India that surpasses the old Indological, the classical Indological view of India, that India is a place of ascetics and it is very idealistic. No, the new sociology, the new Indology of Professor Sarkar or Sarkarism says that India was as much imperialistic, as much ambitious materially as the other great civilizations of the world.
Thank you. So last question we have from the Hindu Vichardhara show. So I don't know if my question is valid, but why did ancient Hindus document social science subjects in poetic form mostly? As I think poems can be mistranslated or misinterpreted.
Yeah, of course, the question is valid, but the worry that this question reflects is unfounded, because first of all, it was not only the ancient Hindus who were writing down their sociological or any kind of material reflection in the verse form. In fact, the ancient Romans were also writing in the same manner. So I will give you the example of Ovid's Metamorphosis and also Ars Amatoria. These are this worldly subjects. So Ars Amatoria is the art of love or love making. So it is basically a kind of Kama Shastra that ancient Roman authors have written, and that is written in the poetic form. So it is, I think, a feature of the ancient world, the classical world, that rather than writing things in prose, people used to fall back on the verse form in order to write it. So I'll also give you a reason why that is so. It is because in ancient and classical world, the writing system was not as prolific. Uh, Forget about printing. There was no concept of printing back then. So how do you preserve your knowledge? You have produced a new text, uh, and you have to record it. You have to pass it on to next generation. So if you write it down in the no write it down, if you compose it in the prosaic form using prose, then it is much more difficult to remember. If you write it or rather, again, I'm using the wrong word. If you compose it in the metrical form, in the form of poetry, in the versical form, then it becomes far easier to remember it, because poetry has rhythm, poetry has meter, it has a musical, a sing-song quality. Therefore, it is far more easier to memorize compared to memorizing prose. If I give you a text of prose, maybe the first page of Rabindranath's Gora, you will find it much more difficult to remember than remembering the poem Shunarturi, right? So that is the basic reason why the versical form, the poetic form, was used. And the other aspect that this question raises is that poems can be mistranslated or misinterpreted. No, we have to remember that it is not romantic poetry, or it is not spiritual or idealistic poetry that we are talking about here. So when we talk about things like Shukra Niti Sara or Kautilya's Arthashastra, Kautilya's Arthashastra is, by the way, written in prose. Okay, so it is not written in verse form, like the Kamandaka Nitisara, or no, sorry, like the Shukra Nitisara of Shukracharya. So Shukracharya's Nitisara is written in the versical form, and many other practical texts, such as the Natya Shastra of Bharata, uh, another great text from classical India, which has to do with practical things. So this is basically a list of prescriptions and descriptions about how a successful theatrical performance can be produced on stage. So these are practical prescriptions, these are practical advices. Why is this written in the versical form? Just because it was oral culture, we did not really have a proliferation of writing methods. We did not have anything to write down. We did not even have the alphabet to start with. So basically, you have to memorize it and keep it preserved in the oral tradition, so that you can pass it down from the guru to shishya. And these were completely straightforward, so it was basically instructions, set of instructions, so you don't have to worry about mistranslating or misinterpreting when you are making or writing commentaries on it, because these are straightforward instructions in the first place. So their commentaries will also be quite straightforward. There will be very little ambiguity about it.
Thank you. I think this is the best question of the show today, and we got at the end of the day. It's a very interesting question, actually, quite different. Thank you for the question. So, thank you, Sujitda, for coming. Thank you for spending time with us and giving us
Thank you.
this knowledge. Okay, that actually we certainly need. I think we are now modern humans in such a way are living in a such kind of like a pressure cooker environment. Okay, where we need let out, okay, in so many ways, from
No, no.
cursing people to taxes to doing their office work.
No, I'm very glad that you have taken up this subject, even though it is difficult in nature, but it is important all the same, and it is very, very crucial for us to be familiar with the texts in Dandaniti, texts like Shukraniti Sara and its commentary by Professor Sarkar in his positive background, so that we can regain our self confidence as a successful materialistic culture. And this should really be the foundation of becoming a Vishwaguru state, rather than only thinking and talking about soft power. So this really tells us that we have a history and tradition of hard power. Why don't we build on that rather than only talking about soft power? So I'm very glad that you have taken up this subject, and I'm very happy to talk about it in your show.
Thank you. I think we have taken a lot of books. So, in terms of IKS series, we're going to talk about thermonomics. We're going to read also Chanakya's Arthashastra and its
Oh,
interpretations, in modern interpretations. So all those actually in the pipeline. So I think
nice.
whole year we will be reading them. So the in terms of IKS series, we have a lot of things which are on the pipeline of reading list.
Very nice. Very, very admirable.
Yeah. So thank you, Sujitda, for coming.
Thank
Hopefully,
you. Namaste.
we will back again to discuss more about it. So I'll have few more things to discuss with you. That we'll do it later privately, and then we will have something. Then we'll come back again and discuss more about the IK series itself.
Sure, it will be a pleasure. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. Good night.
Thank you. Jai Shri Ram. Vande Mataram.
Jai Shri Ram. Vande Mataram.
Thank you.